Hello, it's a Dapper Yapper, Justin Roberts, and you are watching The Wrestling Collectors with Ted, King of the Ring Merch, Hirsch. Today, we will be going through the ring-worn collection of Tim Jameson.
For nearly 8 years, I've run WrestlingForSale.com, the world's greatest wrestling merchandise marketplace. I bought and sold over 10,000 vintage wrestling collectibles. Along the way, I've had the privilege of meeting and interviewing some of the world's most passionate collectors. Call them obsessive, call them crazy. Whatever you call them, join me as we explore their never-before-seen piles of gold. These wrestling historians and wrestling archivists strive for one thing, the Holy Grail. I'm your host, Ted Hirsch, and this is The Wrestling Collectors. All right, so I'm here with Tim. On Instagram, he goes by @TheRingWorn. He has easily the most impressive collection of ring-worn memorabilia I've seen outside of maybe the WWE warehouse. He's been on WWE's Most Wanted Treasure several times. We're going to walk through his collection. I'm completely in awe. I'm a t-shirt guy. This is a completely different world. So Tim, let's start at the beginning. When did you start watching wrestling?
Ooh, let's see. My first memory of watching wrestling was like 1988 or 89. It was the Mega Powers Explode. I remember watching or kind of seeing that. Wasn't too like into because I was like 6 at the time. So, I wasn't following closely. My dad watched it, so I would watch it too. So that's like my earliest memory. About 92 was when I got like fully into it, like the Coliseum video era, renting those things. That's when I kind of dedicated my whole life to watching wrestling, whether it be TV or videos or whatever. So somewhere in there, kind of developed a love and passion for wrestling.
And who is your favorite wrestler?
That is an easy one, Bret Hart. No questions asked, always has been. I don't know, even when I was younger, like in that era, never was a big Hulk Hogan fan, never was a big like Ultimate Warrior fan. Bret the Hitman Hart, by far my favorite. Randy Savage too, was in there, but by far and away, I have like an entire wing of the collection here dedicated to Bret. So,
what era of wrestling do you typically collect?
Pretty much anything from like late 80s until about early 2000s. I'd say like around 2005. So yeah, pretty much anything within that era. WWF, WCW, ECW, USWA. I'll collect anything kind of within that time frame.
So was there a match or an event that really drew you in and made you like a super fan?
I would say probably SummerSlam 92. That was the one. I mean, that by far today is like my favorite pay-per-view. Like if I had to watch one more wrestling event, that would be it. Like you can't watch anything else after this. I'd watch that again. I don't know, something about that event, the arena, being outdoors, the crowd, the matches, Bret Hart kind of finishing the show with the Bulldog and kind of the emotion with that match. It's that event.
Just the sheer size of the stadium.
Yeah.
A lot of shows that year had giant stadiums. WrestleMania 8 is in a huge venue in Indianapolis. And just seeing the sheer size and the outdoor and a very memorable card, some really cool stuff that, I always go back to, like when the Road Warriors came back as LOD with Paul Ellering. In the main event, such a unique thing where the Intercontinental Championship is the headliner, obviously because of Davey Boy Smith. Do you own any ring-worn items from that event?
I do. I own a couple. So one thing, I guess, central to just SummerSlam in general, I have the sign that they would have in the background of all the interviews. So the SummerSlam sign, that like purple and orange sign, I have that, which was used SummerSlam 91, 92, 93, I think 92, I think those 4 years. I have the robe that Ric Flair wore at that event. He didn't wrestle, but he was kind of involved in the Warrior Savage match. So that robe he wore out to the ring when he came out ringside, I have that. I have the jacket, again, not on the main card, but the Nasty Boys wrestled on the show. They aired that match, I think, on prime time later. But I have one of the jackets from Jerry Sags that he was wearing. So I think my ultimate grail would probably be the Winged Eagle that Brett won in '92. So I think the same one that Flair held, Savage, Brett, Hogan, and Yoko, kind of in that era. That would probably be it. But WWE has that, so
The shirt with Flair and Brett is considered one of the most sought after shirts there is. So I can only imagine, assuming that would sell for $1,500, $2,000, what a ring worn item would go for from that event.
I still am blown away sometimes at the value of the t-shirts in a sense. So I don't know what it is, but yeah, ring worn stuff sometimes, depending on the wrestler and the item, can be fairly inexpensive, probably cheaper than some of those t-shirts. But yeah, more distinguishable items from more kind of headline acts. Yeah, they can go for a life savings depending on depending on the item, I guess.
Hey, wrestling fans, this is Gary Michael Capetta. If you're looking for rare, authentic wrestling merch, there's only one guy to see, and that's Ted, King of the Ring Merch Hirsch. See him at Wrestling for Sale and tell him GMC sent you.
And what do you think your most valuable item is?
The Ric Flair robe I have. That one, pretty easy to say that. Yeah, I mean, they had bought a Ric Flair robe on that Treasure show in the first season that went for about $100,000. They have sold some on auctions, on your Heritage auction or your Golden auction for $45,000-$50,000, ranging from 20 to like 45. So most definitely that robe.
Do you have the greatest ring worn collection outside of WWE?
I would never say that. I probably have one of the largest collections. I certainly think it's a great collection. Many others probably would too. But I would never say it's the greatest. I would never say that about anything I have. Oh, it's the greatest, because it's so subjective. But yeah, I would say I have one of the largest collections out there. I know maybe one or two people that have, maybe, in the same kind of size of my collection. But there's a lot of private collectors out there too that they don't really share a lot. Like I share a lot on Instagram. I'm probably more the exception than the rule when it comes to collectors in this hobby. Most don't share as freely as I do, but I like sharing. I think people want to see it, and what else am I gonna do with it, in a sense? Like, I want to share it. Maybe someday kind of take it on the road in a sense. I don't know. I've thought about doing that in a couple instances, but I do have a passion for collecting. I have a deep amount of respect for the items, whether it's kind of something as small, say, as like, a Barry Horowitz pair of trunks from Barry Horowitz, or a Ric Flair robe. Like, everything in it, that was used is tied to some sort of memory, to somebody. So I have a deep amount of respect in kind of preserving them and curating them in a sense.
As someone who just kind of watches from the outside, it's incredible to see what you do post. I definitely encourage you to post. I know some people are kind of reluctant sometimes, or like to keep everything kind of to themselves, I guess you could say. But the fact that you're showcasing it, and the photography is so beautiful, it's really, really impressive to see a lot of these items that I think, like, if someone were to get their hands on like 2 or 3 of these things, they'd probably consider to be a really incredible collection. I mean, from experience, like, I traded you the only ring worn items I really had, which was my Power and Glory set, which were very meaningful to me. They were the ring worn set that they wore at WrestleMania 7, which I went to with my dad. I think that they were one of the more underrated tag teams of all time. That was not their best day, but definitely to have.
That's because Paul Roma was hurt.
Yeah, yeah. But when you're 7 years old, you don't know what's really going on behind the scenes. So besides the Brett singlet that you'd mentioned and the Flair robe, do you have some others that you would consider to be your favorite items in your collection?
Yeah, it's tough to pick favorites. I don't have kids, and imagine it's like picking your favorite kid or whatever, but or your favorite pet. But they're usually, my favorite items are tied to some of my favorite wrestlers, or I even say performers in a sense. So, outside of like the Ric Flair robe and the Bret Hart singlet, I would say my favorite item behind those are the Bobby Heenan. Some of the Bobby Heenan items I have, one being the WrestleMania 3 jacket. So that white jacket, that long coat that he wore managing Andre the Giant. I have that in my collection. I also have one of his pullover sweaters that it's black and it has like the crystallized BH on the chest and the design on the back. So those are two of my favorite overall items behind those. I have a Curt Hennig singlet, a Mr. Perfect singlet that I really do, I love a lot.
My favorite ring worn item that I have, it's also the only ring worn item I have.
I was going to say, you said earlier, like, oh, I don't, I gave you or traded you some of my ring worn. I was like, nah, I was thinking, you got one more piece.
Yeah. Well, that'll probably be the last thing I'd ever get rid of in terms of like my wrestling collection overall. You just wore it at so many of the events that I love, and like you put on like a random superstars from 1989 who's wearing it. It's like, to me, such an important thing for many reasons. One, he didn't have a true shirt. He is featured on one crew shirt from 1992 that is kind of interesting, but it's not like a front print and really nothing to write home about in terms of like an eye-catching design. So to me, that's like the item. I don't know if I would ever wear it. You'd probably try to kill me if I did that, but
yep. People ask me all the time, you ever wear any of this stuff? I'm like, absolutely not. Bobby Heenan, he was special. And, you asked me who my favorite wrestler was, and that's Bret Hart. But I often say my favorite performer, so I would include wrestlers and, just performer in general in wrestling, is Bobby Heenan.
And I was very much like a Hogan, Savage, Ultimate Warrior guy. He's right there in terms of importance. He's the most memorable part of a lot of these events, mainly because a lot of the time, Hogan's on at the end for like 15, 20 minutes. Bobby Heenan will appear 3-4 times as a manager, get on commentary, backstage interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Such a performance, so well rounded. So how many times have you been on WWE Treasures?
It depends on when this airs or when you release this, but so far 2 have aired. I have filmed a third one. I'm not entirely sure when that one is airing yet. So 2 episodes, which was the Mick Foley episode in season 1 and the Bret Hart in season 2, and there's a third one forthcoming.
You'd mentioned your holy grail, the winged eagle that was held by several superstars from 92 to 93. If it were to become available, how much would you pay for this item?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's tough. Whatever it took. I mean, there's a couple people that definitely have the resources to outbid me. Whatever it took, I don't know if I have a good, clear answer for that. If it took $100,000, I'd take $100,000. I don't know if that would do it.
If it took $100,000, I'd take $100,000.
So
you're fully prepared to pay 6 figures.
Oh, I would, yeah. If I could get that belt, sure.
It's so crazy because, you know, a lot of people will complain about the prices of the items I sell. I don't think I've ever sold anything like over $4,000. So like hearing these numbers, obviously, look, a shirt that was sold in the merch stand versus the belt that was held by 5 or 6 of the most iconic wrestlers of all time is a completely different ballgame. But hearing this bigger item in the wrestling world is extremely interesting. And, you know, I guess, yeah, that would be, I mean, to me, either that winged eagle from that era. I don't know if it's the exact same one that Hogan held, but I assume those are the 2 most important belts ever made. Where do you see the market going?
It's tough to say. It's going up, so I think it'll continue to go up with the more that, you know, the hobby's grown. And when I started in about 2010 or so. It's kind of when I bought my first items, so 13 years ago. The value on items have gone up. It's tough to say how much it will go up. With WWE being invested in buying items, that's changed things quite a bit recently in the last couple of years. But, you know, if you just look at, you'll see a Randy Savage jacket behind me, right? So Randy himself had sold a bunch of these items on eBay back in, and these are the early days of eBay, 2001, 2, 3, whatever. That jacket would have sold on eBay then for $600, $300, $400, somewhere in that range. You know, 10 years ago, $1,200 maybe, you know, on the second, you know, the secondary collector selling it for $1,200. That jacket, you know, less than a year ago cost me $10,000. There's jackets on, you know, they just had an auction on one of the main auction houses, $13,000. So, you know, it is really impossible to tell, like, when will that just bust? When will that stop? When will you hit the ceiling? I don't know. You know, Randy Savage jacket might be worth $13,000 to one person and $500 to the next. So I mean, it's just, and I know that's the case with every single, you know, kind of hobby and collectible, but you know, with this, because it's one of one, I mean, it really is, how much does it mean to the person who either has it or is maybe bidding against you?
And the Winged Eagles were around for what, 10 years? It was 88 to 98.
Yeah, in 88 to 98, 10 years exactly. Austin, it was, well, Shawn Michaels was the last one to really hold it. Austin won it, and I don't know if it was the next night or a week. Yeah.
Do you know how many exist?
Ooh, ring used one? I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, there have been a few. I mean, they broke one, and that one is actually in collector's hands. So the one that Mr. Perfect had busted up on a Saturday night's main event is actually in a private collection now. I would say there's probably, you know, in the mid 90s, kind of around that era that Shawn had held it, I know that they made 1 or 2 as well. So they probably had 5 or 6. I don't know off the top of my head. But you know, if you count the one that Perfect broke up, I think they replaced that with the one that Brett had. And then that one got replaced because it actually had a broken wing on one of the Eagles. So they replaced that in about 94-ish. And then in 95 or 97, I think they had made you know, 1 or 2. So probably 5 or 6. And I had a pretty decent collection of authentic wrestling belts, not ring used. I had one ring used belt in my collection that I parted with, you know, years ago, but you know, actually the same quality that they made on television. I kind of sold all those belts to fund or help kind of build the ring gear collection.
I was going to ask, I mean, this had to start somewhere, you know, like me, all of this started because I had 40 shirts that my parents had bought me growing up, and basically turned those into the first 40 or so items that I sold for wrestling for sale. Took that, started buying other piles, started collecting, started selling, and so on. Do you sell much?
I don't sell much gear Sometimes I'll trade it if I am trying to, get an item, but I don't sell too much. I've learned my lesson on that actually, because I mean, I don't need to sell or anything like that, but I've sold some items to help some people out, like newer collectors, and then it's frustrated me because 2 months later it's on the market and it's, two times what they bought it from me for. And so I kind of learned my lesson pretty quickly that, I'm not gonna sell this stuff.
So to me, one of the more underrated bodies of work, I would say, would be WCW in 1993. One of the few ring worn items that I had coveted, I found out that you actually have, and that is, in past episodes I've talked about my love for Rick Rude and how he's probably the person I'd want to have the heavyweight championship if I were to go back and book WWF differently in that era. So to see him have the belt and be in the main event against the greatest of all time, Ric Flair, is very cool, very fun to see. And on top of that, he, to me, has the best ring gear of all time. This is probably the coolest ring worn Rick Rude item. So I'd love for you to talk about that and, kind of showcase what you have, because I saw it on eBay years ago and I wanted it. And I'm not even a ring worn collector, but it was something that I was considering.
These tights meant the world to the collector who had them. And it took me 4 years to negotiate getting these tights from him. Ultimately ended up in a trade, but that's one of the things about this hobby too. You have to have a lot of patience because people aren't really, again, they're one of ones. People aren't really willing to just part with something very easily sometimes, unless there's, a need for money or something like that. They may, unexpectedly part with something, but it can take a while to work with somebody on getting something. And these took me 4 years, and I had to, like you said, one of the coolest pairs of tights from Rick Rude in general. And he had some of the greatest wrestling attire, only worn once. I really like them too because Halloween Havoc was my favorite WCW event, right? So having that tie into Halloween Havoc, Rick Rude versus Ric Flair, having the robe that Rick wore in that match, or the one he wore to the ring for that match, which is where these get displayed next to. It was one of those kind of like must-have items to get, and it took quite a bit to get them.
Obviously, the main question that everyone's curious about is, how did you get this point in collecting where you've compiled some of the greatest ring worn items ever, and 13 years is kind of a long time, but kind of not, considering what you have. How did you get all of these items? What is the process like? Because for me, with the shirts, I'm buying piles off collectors. I'll keep like one or two if I buy 30, 40 things, if it's something important to me. But this is a different ballgame. How are you acquiring so many? And at this point, how many items do you think you have in your collection?
That's easy because I have a running, well, not easy, but I have a running kind of inventory list. So I have over 300 items from over 100 wrestlers. Like, the number's like 312, but some of those are kind of skewed because sometimes I count like a set, like a Bret Hart set. It's like a 3-piece set, singlet, tights, trunks. That's 3 items. I count it as one, right? I guess your best avenue to get an item is eBay, or it used to be eBay. That's kind of died down, but eBay, Facebook groups kind of dedicated to wrestling collectibles. And you might find some ring worn items in there because most people don't have a large collection like this. They have 1 or 2 items that maybe they got on eBay years and years and years ago, and they've kept it for 10 years, and now they've decided to part with it, right? So that's where I might find some stuff on Facebook. eBay, the same thing. Sometimes you can work with a wrestler if you can get in contact with them directly, and purchase something directly from them. I don't have as much success with that as maybe just finding items through collections in general, because it can be hard to get in contact, especially with a lot of the older wrestlers. They're not on social media, Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that, as much as the newer kind of current generation. So the older wrestlers are a little bit harder to get in contact with, and sometimes when you do, I mean, I can tell the story of working with a wrestler from that era that I collect, and he's still actually active today. But it was a year. It was a year of emailing back and back and forth, and every time I'd reach out, he'd say, oh, I'm busy doing X, Y, and Z, reach out in December. And then I'd reach out in December, and I'll reach out in March. And so you got to have patience, but you also have to be, I guess, willing. And you would know this in the t-shirt is too. You have to be ready to purchase. The worst thing you could do is, initiate conversations, and then, when it comes time to a deal being made, then back out because maybe you don't have the funds required or whatever. So you kind of have to be cash ready to purchase on the spot wherever you might find that, because these things don't last long. I mean, all it takes, I've passed on items in the past that I've regretted because I've passed on them. They sell days, weeks later, and then you never see them again. They're gone forever. They end up in someone's collection who's maybe private, or it just, maybe some random person bought it. And again, they're not posting about this stuff on social. You never see it again. So you got to be ready to buy and also ready to keep too, I guess, in a sense, And because I wasn't, I think, also in love with the current wrestling product, and I wanted to go back. I'm a nostalgic person, and I wanted to go back to what wrestling was when I was a kid. And I think everybody does, in a sense. And the current generation now of fans that are kids will think this way probably 15 years from now. But I wanted to go back to that, and I thought collecting this stuff, preserving this stuff was a way for me to kind of live that all over again.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. I kind of have like a hard cap of like 2001 in terms of like what I collect. Very few things I'll add. One would be like the CM Punk stuff from Money in the Bank 2011. But
I was at that event and I didn't buy a damn thing, and I wish I had.
Hit the shirt where on the back it has the date of the event is one of the more sought after shirts. I'd say it's the most important WWE shirt there is.
I was at that show and didn't even think to buy it. I was just like, again, because I wasn't as big a fan. I was just kind of like, oh, yeah, here I am. It's in Chicago. I'll go. And then 2 weeks later, when everyone was going crazy over that shirt, I was like, oh, I should have bought one of those.
If I see one, I'll send it to you. How about that?
Thank you. All right.
In terms of modern stuff, like we're in an age now where I don't know if you're keeping up with the current product, but to me, we're in the middle of one of the greatest storylines of all time with the Bloodline. Is any of that attractive to you? Are you looking to get your hands on any of this, any of the Sami Zayn stuff, any of the Paul Heyman stuff, any of the Roman Reigns stuff? Now that we really are in a historically significant modern storyline.
Not really. I don't know. I do keep up with the product and I watch it. I think just because now I'm 40 and I have a real job and I dedicate a lot of time to this. I don't have a lot of time to dedicate to watching 5 or 6 hours of WWE and 3 hours or 2 hours of AEW. I've had some modern items in my collection that I've let go of and haven't really regretted it. I had some Seth Rollins items. I had some Dean Ambrose items, or Jon Moxley. So no, it doesn't. I do enjoy the Bloodline storyline. Like when I watch it, it is interesting and it is cool. And I watched WrestleMania and thought it was a great 2 nights of shows. But no, unless there's some tie to history, like Natalia, being, a generation, of the Hart family. There's not a whole lot, not a whole lot that like motivates me to buy and collect. Maybe I'll regret that. Maybe I'll still be collecting in 10 years, and I'm sure I will be. And maybe I'll regret not buying a Roman Reigns or a Sami Zayn item.
I'm not going to tell you what to collect, but it seems like there might be a regret with this bloodline thing.
Yeah, there probably is.
To your point, it's mainly because of history.
Mm-hmm.
It is the culmination of one of the greatest historical things that have ever happened in wrestling, where for the first time they've really run a storyline that's gone this long, but also has been such a focus on the past. And you have the people like Rikishi and Yokozuna and Rocky Maivia and Rocky Johnson and everyone who's been part of this bloodline, culminating in the current product with, it's really hard to say in the moment, but I'd say 2 years ago, Roman Reigns wasn't even like in my rankings.
Yeah.
The storyline, he's trending towards being like a top 10 wrestler of all time. And this is really an era where we're living in the moment and we're not thinking about collecting, but should we be collecting?
You're probably right. I don't know. You're probably right on should we be collecting? Yeah. But now that you mention it, it would be cool. Like I have a pair of Rocky Johnson trunks. Like it would be cool to have Rocky Johnson trunks and then like Roman Reigns, to like that whole family. Like it'd be cool to put a collection together like that for the history.
So just in terms of like layout, what percentage of your home showcases these items? This is a lot, and they're all on mannequins. It's not like what I do where I have 300 shirts and they're tucked nicely into one dresser. These are basically bodies in your home. How much of your home and how many things are actually on display?
Let's see. So it's just the basement. So the basement it's finished basements. That's where all the displays are. I don't know. What is it, about 1,100 square foot down here?
It's kind of crazy. My entire collection is in about 5 square feet.
I keep adding. There's over 60 mannequins. Not all full size, but some are kind of like just the pants. Some are just the chest, like a jacket. But overall, down here, there's over 60 mannequins down here on display. Upstairs is completely normal house. So, and then I have a TV down here and a PlayStation. So it's kind of just the wrestling cave. And, Mick Foley has come over here on 3 different occasions for just pay-per-view parties. And, that's where we watch the wrestling down here. Yeah. He brought a friend once with him. That he wanted that person to see the collection as well. So
you have a stocking over his face and a chainsaw?
Nope. No. That would have been cool though, man.
Yeah. So Tim, this was really incredible. This is something that I don't typically deal in, and much like the toy collectors that I've talked to, this is incredibly fascinating, and I've learned so much. Just as an outsider, I can tell you it's one of the more, if not the most impressive wrestling collection that I've ever seen. So I do encourage you, please continue to share on Instagram. It's beautiful photography. It's what the world really needs. If we are a fan, we want to learn about these things, and seeing some of these treasures pop up from some of our favorite events and some of our favorite wrestlers is some of the coolest things you can see on Instagram and any other social media. So thank you so much for that.
That it really does. I put a lot of work into it, and I really do appreciate when people say that about what I do on there, because that's what I want to do. And sometimes I don't know if I'm living up to that. Sometimes I just don't know, like, am I really, these things are so important, I think. And some people might think that's stupid to say that, but these things are so important. The wrestlers that kind of, brought them to life are important to a lot of people. And that's what I, want to share. And, sometimes I wonder, like, how does this account not have 100,000 followers or whatever? But I look at some of the other accounts and I'm like, they just repost the same pictures you've seen for 10 years and they've got hundreds of thousands of followers. And I just hit 10,000 But I don't do it for the followers. But like, I'm always appreciative of when people say like, "Hey, you know, I love your page or feed or whatever you call it. I love your account." And it, you know, brings back so many great memories because that's kind of what I set out to do. So I plan on doing it in person somehow, some way, you know, whether it's taking stuff on the road or opening a physical space sometime. I do plan on doing it.
Maybe we'll collab on a museum one day.
Maybe t-shirts and ring gear, and that'd be sweet.
Again, we're so lucky to have accounts like you that exist. I know you're not getting the visibility of meme accounts or highlights.
Yeah.
To me, and I would consider myself an expert in the field, it's one of my favorite accounts. After this comes out, you know, I know you have great visibility on treasures, but my niche following, I hope, follows you. So I know it's there, might be very small and they can't see, but again, on Instagram at the Ringworn, Tim's an incredible follow. I encourage you all to go ahead and follow him and take a look at everything. Tim, thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to see what's next.
There's a lot coming. So, and thank you. This is the first time I've done an interview like this. So outside of the treasure. So it was a pleasure. So thank you. And I encourage everyone to follow your account. Anybody who's not already watching this, not following Wrestling for Sale, please do.